Welcome to EDD 939, Module 6. And in this module, we are looking at the idea of strategic acting. And we're going through these sections of strategic aspects as the book identifies them. So last module looked at the aspect of strategic thinking. For this one, strategic acting. And then in the next module, we'll be looking at strategic influence. And I do want to say this, even though this is a 2-week module, there's only going to be 4 lectures for this module. And I'm sure you're very disappointed. Only 4 lectures that you get to watch, right? But I did that because we're kind of at the midpoint in the semester, maybe a little bit beyond midpoint. But as I look at the schedule and the syllabus, there's quite a few things due right around this time. So I want to give you a little lighter viewing schedule so that you can kind of catch your breath a little bit here in this section of the semester and really ramp up to finish well. So I hope you're doing well in the course. Hope you are learning from the content, from the book, from the lectures, and I hope you're enjoying it too. I hope you're finding it practical and applicable. And so, again, in this module, we're talking about strategic acting, and in the first lecture, we're going to be talking about the mindset for strategic acting, and then in lecture 2, talking about decisive acting, lecture 3, looking at the concept of agility, and then finally ending up in chapter 4, lecture 4, talking about learning organizations. Going to adjust the camera just a little bit. There we go. And learning organizations and how those connect to strategic acting. So hopefully you found the slide deck for this module, and we're going to jump into it. So the first thing is to talk about the mindset for strategic acting. And I know that this is covered in the book, but I thought it was important to make sure that we cover this section from the book, because I think this helps us see the connection between strategic thinking and strategic acting. And I have known some individuals in my life who are very good at strategic thinking, but they don't always transition that into action. And I myself have been guilty of that, I know, in the past. One of my favorite things to do is to sit around with colleagues and kind of envision what the future could be, do a little dreaming, so to speak, and thinking about that, and we come up with some really great visions, but we don't always then convert that into action. And I realize sometimes some of those conversations are literally we don't have the power to do anything, or maybe we think we don't. And so sometimes it is just talking, but we want to make sure that we convert our strategic thoughts and plans into action. And it kind of goes to that idea that, a lot of strategic plans, a lot of organizations have them, but they become nothing more than binders on a shelf. And those plans, those thoughts never become action. So that's why we want to talk about this section, the mindset for strategic acting, because it is that connection. It's the connection between the thinking and the acting. So that first, or I guess now third side, but the one with really some content on there is I make the point, only some actions are strategic. And I like the book's definition, page 106 in the textbook, their definition of strategic acting. And, they say, but our focus in this chapter is not on all forms of acting. It's on the more specific idea of strategic acting, committing resources to build sustainable competitive advantage. committing resources to build sustainable competitive advantage. And I think that is that key idea that we want to keep in mind when we are talking about the mindset for strategic acting, and this idea that only some actions are strategic, because not all actions have impact on competitive advantage. And keep in mind, competitive advantage is real even for nonprofits. Now, we don't always think in those terms. Typically, when we think competitive advantage, it's in a for-profit kind of way. But even a nonprofit, what is your competitive advantage? And while you may not be in competition with a rival, so to speak, you are trying to offer a service. And so what is that? So strategic actions are those that impact there. And again, I just make the point, we want to make sure that there is a connection between thinking and acting. And I commented, we want to make sure that we actually turn our thoughts into actions. That also runs the other direction. And what I mean by that is we want to make sure our actions are actually connected to thought. Because as much as I've known individuals who are really good at the strategic thinking and sitting around and thinking and everything else, but those thoughts don't always convert and turn into actions, I've also known plenty of people who do a whole lot of acting and very little thinking. Now, obviously, you know what I mean. Clearly, there's some sort of thought process going on, but it's kind of ready, fire, aim, right? Instead of ready, aim, fire. And so we want to make sure that our actions are connected to thinking. And I recognize here, as we talk about that only some actions are strategic, I want to acknowledge that there is an incredible amount of pressure on leaders in particular, but anyone who has an influential position in an organization, which is going to be everyone that's in this course. There's incredible pressure to make decisions. There's actually workshops you can attend on decision-making strategies, and many of them, while they talk about we want to make better decisions, they're also very focused on making faster decisions. And so there is this, I acknowledge and recognize there is this pressure on individuals within organizations to make decisions, any decision kind of thing. I know I sometimes feel like I have made my own children feel. And what I mean by that is this. If you've ever been around small children or have small children, when you go to order at a fast food restaurant or maybe an ice cream, parlor kind of thing, those children often can lock up in their decision making, right? Especially, I remember as a kid going, it wasn't my own kids, but it was with my brother. And we're at Baskin Robbins, right? If you remember Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. And he just my mom tells the story, and I remember he kind of locked up. And it's like, finally, what do you want? Vanilla, right? You have all these flavors to pick from, but he couldn't choose, and the pressure was on. And I've put that pressure on my own kids. I look back, and the line's building up, and everyone's gonna get angry. Come on, order your ice cream already. Well, we can feel that way in an organization. It's like, make a decision. And that's not the pressure, but we do need to make decisions. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that they are informed decisions. So strategic acting is preceded by strategic thinking, and that's the point we're driving at. And then I just want to make the point that a friend of mine commented on this years ago, and it's this. We spend a lot of time doing, but we are called human beings. And so we need to spend more time being rather than so much doing. And that allows us to be strategic. I've read of some leaders in articles or in their books that they've written. I remember one in particular where he said, I think he was a leader of a nonprofit, if I'm remembering correctly, and he said he built time into his day to just sit at his desk and think. And he would close the door, he'd block it on his calendar, close the door, and I think he had an assistant, let his assistant know, don't disturb me, and he would just sit and look out the window. Sometimes he would think about something. Sometimes it would just be a time just to, and thoughts always come to mind. And he said sometimes he would just appreciate the trees or the birds outside or whatever. But we don't spend enough time doing that. And what a lot of the literature is telling us is if we take those times to just be, then a lot of times that's when we can become strategic. But my wife and I were having this conversation even yesterday. We're so wired to do that what happens is we feel like if I just sit and am quiet for a while, then that's a waste of time. Or even, last week, a friend of ours, a lady, just not going through a horrible time, but just needed some encouragement in her life. And my wife went over and they'd planned this, and they sat and ended up being about 2.5 hours that my wife was there, just sitting with this lady, drinking coffee and talking. And she came home and we were talking later in the day, and she said something like, "Oh, I don't feel like I've gotten anything done." And I said, "You spent 2.5 hours with a friend who needed you. I'd say you got a lot done today." And, and that wasn't, a rebuke on my wife, because I feel the same way. Sometimes I have to remind myself, if I spend 45 minutes with my kids just talking, I can look at my stack of work that I need to do for my classes, and it's like, oh, I just wasted 45 minutes. No, I didn't. But you see, that's how our minds were, especially in American culture. Do. So we need to take some time to be. Then we can be more strategic. Anyway, enough of my soapbox on that. And then just the last thing on this part is we need to recognize, don't agonize over decisions that don't have strategic impact. I think sometimes then what happens is we get bogged down and we become afraid to make decisions, and we agonize over decisions that really don't have long-term strategic impact. And so just make a decision, move on, and live with the consequences. And, I've also read, and I think it's a wise statement, that the test of an individual, the test of a leader, isn't often what decision you make. Rather, it's how you live with the decisions that you've made, right? So, pick a paint color kind of thing, right? It doesn't have a long-term strategic impact on the organization. And it may not be the best color in the world, and you may have to live with it for 3 years or whatever the budget says, but pick it, move on. As long as it's not, ghastly or something. So that's the idea. And then the next slide is recognizing that strategic acting, and we've talked about this a little bit, but strategic acting is both short-term and long-term. It's for the short and long-term. And again, this seems to be a hard balance to find for individuals. And I think we talked about this in the last module with strategic thinking. But because it seems a lot of individuals and or organizations are good at one or the other, either the short-term or the long-term. But strategic acting applies to both. And recognizing that making the right decisions in the moment can have significant impact on the long term. And so it does need to be connected to thought, and it does need to be strategic, because it can have significant impact on the long term. And then also recognizing that short-term decisions can be strategic. not just because they have an impact on the long term. Now recognize sometimes the short-term decisions that I make have an impact on long term as well, right? But just sometimes they're just short-term decisions, and I can approach them from a strategic standpoint, going back to, does this help us with our competitive advantage? And so just recognizing that. The next one then, the next slide is strategic acting is an opportunity for learning. And this is a key concept within this strategic acting section. And we're going to be talking about the learning organization in that last lecture for this module. But strategic acting is an opportunity for learning. And what I mean by that is through reflecting on the decisions made and the actions taken, then we can learn from that. So it isn't just making the decisions or taking the actions that make it a learning experience. What we have to do is we have to take time then to reflect on the decisions made and the actions taken. The military, I can't remember if I've mentioned this in this course or not, but the military kind of are the ones that originated some of this idea, and they conduct AARs. And a lot of organizations have adopted those as well. And an AAR is an after-action review. So if you've ever been a part of an after-action review, that concept is from the U.S. military. They're the ones who developed it. And it came from when they do their war games and their simulations and things like that. They then get together and, basically, I'm oversimplifying, but ask what went well, what didn't go well, what could we have done better. But what it is it's a forced reflection time. I think I've mentioned the gentleman Ray Jorgensen before. Again, I mentioned him in different classes, so I don't know if I mentioned him in here, but worked with him as a consultant when we were at State Farm and just learned a lot from him. But he had many statements I liked. One of them that I've used a lot is, the power is in the debrief. And I use that especially within a training and development context. But what he meant was, we have these experiences, but the real power comes out of the experience, whether it's a meeting or a project or some sort of learning simulation. The real power comes out of it when we debrief it, right? So what happened? What did you learn? Those kind of things. That's what we're talking about here. Strategic acting is an opportunity for learning. And this connects with what we've already talked about previously, that idea of uncovering the mental models that we have and the implicit beliefs and assumptions. So we can actually use the reflection in these situations. As we make decisions, we take actions. Then when we take the opportunity to reflect on those, to turn them into a learning opportunity, we can actually use that to uncover mental models and implicit beliefs and assumptions. So what were the mental models that I was carrying into this situation that led me to make the decisions that I made? What were the implicit beliefs and assumptions that I had as I went into this situation that led to the decisions and the actions that I made and that I took? And so, and then I put on some questions there that we might ask. What data did I have? So what was the information that I had that led me to make this decision? And connected with that, and what data did I act upon? Right? Because that's a key question. Not just what data did I have, but what data did I actually choose to act upon in this situation? Why did I take the actions I did? So just kind of asking yourself those questions help us to reflect. And then the final thing for this idea of strategic acting is that strategic decisions always involve uncertainty. And recognizing that, accepting that fact is key. Strategic decisions always involve uncertainty. And this, honestly, is one of the greatest challenges for many people, I think, because we often, especially again, in American culture, we want to make sure that we have all the information before we make the decision. I don't know about you, but I've driven myself almost crazy when I've gone to make big purchases. So in a big purchase, I mean high dollar. So like buying a new computer. I was buying a new computer a couple years ago, and I just got to the point where I told my wife, I'm like, all right, I just need to pick one and buy it, right? And because I was going crazy reading, because this one's awesome, no it's not, it's terrible. Well, this one's awesome, no it's not, it's terrible. And especially with all the comment sections we have, and this one has this features, this one. At some point you got to shut it off and just say, okay, I think this one's going to meet my needs, right? So and I'm one who's compelled to get as much information as possible. So, but I have to accept there's uncertainty. And another reason this is hard for us is that we're paralyzed by the need to be right. I think I mentioned this one to you before. Another one of Ray Jorgensen's statements that I like is the greatest learning disability is the need to be right. I can't learn from others, and I would also say it's one of the greatest paralyzers to making decisions. Well, I've got to make sure I'm making the right decision. Well, can I say that there's a lot of times where there isn't a right or wrong decision? There's just a decision. And then again, how do then we live with the decision that we've made? Because most decisions that we make, even within our organizational context, are not right or wrong. There's not a moral component to them per se, nor is it going to be the death knell of our program or our organization. So we need to get over that. And then this is where we've talked about culture in this course already, but this is where the overall culture can help if we are willing to allow people to make mistakes in life. And so that's really a key idea that we want to keep in mind here. So hopefully this has been helpful to you, and we'll see you in the next lecture when we talk about decisive acting.